Welcome to the pod focusing on the aftermath and recovery from the devastating Palisades fires of January 2025. Journalist Joel Pollak, entrepreneur Oren Ezra, and technology expert Ron Goldschmidt serve up to the moment vital news and information, discuss the ongoing recovery efforts, and introduce us to the individuals and trades who are playing key roles in rebuilding our cherished communities. We're diving into the deep end and learning quickly how we can move forward together. We know the pain because we're living real-time news, stories, resources, and insights on the ongoing recovery effort. Buckle up. We're three homeless guys.
Welcome to Three Homeless Guys, the podcast about the Palisades fire and the rebuilding effort. I'm journalist Joel Pollak, here with technology expert Ron Goldschmidt, and entrepreneur Oren Ezra is out of town this week. We are very pleased to be joined once again by Joy Chen of the Eaton Fire Survivors Network. And Joy, why don't you say a quick hello, and we're going to get into your news, I think, more extensively as we get into the podcast, but give us a brief overview of what's going on.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Joy Chen, Executive Director of the Eaton Fire Survivors Network. So we have about 8,200 members from the Eaton side and 300 members and growing from the Palisades side. We've been fighting on insurance for the last 10 months since the fire. During this time, we've been collecting all kinds of evidence of insurer misconduct, many firsthand accounts coming from the Palisades. We collected over 400 first-hand accounts of misconduct by State Farm, specifically from Eaton and Palisades fire survivors. We have been trying to get our state insurance commissioner to enforce the laws against illegal delays and denials and underpayments. None of that has worked. He's held firm, continuing to reward this misconduct with billion-dollar rate hikes. So the biggest news is that 3 weeks ago, we brought all this evidence to the County of Los Angeles, to Supervisor Catherine Barger, and to Los Angeles County Council. And within 3 weeks, they launched a major investigation of State Farm last Thursday. This is an investigation that can lead to restitution of our premiums, payment of what's owed to us, and criminal charges against State Farm and its executives. So this is no joke. And since Thursday, we're hearing all kinds of accounts of Eaton and Palisades fire survivors suddenly getting paid out from State Farm on ALE, on Coverage A, and even on their inventory. So this is a huge win, and it's a testament to our working together, Eaton and Palisades fire survivors, a collaboration which started on this podcast in my first time here last spring. But it's just one milestone, and there's still a long road ahead to hold our insurers accountable.
Well, you are doing incredible work, and the investigation, I think, is having some effect already. I'm hearing some anecdotal reports that people are finally getting some kind of movement from State Farm, and I do think it's a result of your work and all the scrutiny that's been on the company. And really, without you, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, we wouldn't have seen the California Insurance Commissioner, Ricardo Lara, start to examine State Farm's practices, however reluctantly, and the investigation now from the county. And there are a lot of other things happening as well, which we should talk about, and we'll get into in a minute. I just want to give a brief overview of the news as we see it right now, as of the week before Thanksgiving in November. You know, I've spent a lot of time in Pacific Palisades over the last month or so because of my new job at the California Post, which has been going very well. I mean, it's a big challenge starting something new and a completely new company. Yes, it has a parent company in the New York Post, but it really is a separate entity and a steep learning curve and still building it out and everything. But you know, it's been interesting to go to Pacific Palisades and see that there is some rebuilding that's happening. You're starting to see some wood frames go up, which is encouraging. I just got a text message from my neighbor who said that with the recent rains, basically all of the empty lots are swimming pools, essentially, because, you know, you have these depressed areas where the soil's been scraped away and now it's all just filled with water. I mean, if that happened here, where I am right now in Washington, D.C., there would be a swarm of mosquitoes a few weeks later. Just, I hope that doesn't happen in Palisades, but you can't have standing water like that. It's a hazard and it's bad. So we'll see. It's really 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and that's if you're lucky. But we are seeing some hopeful signs. I mean, I was thrilled to go to the Marquez Charter Elementary School, which of course burned down, but they've now replaced it with prefabricated rooms and trailers. And some of the facilities, the kids say, are nicer than they were at the old school, like the bathrooms. The bathrooms apparently are a lot cleaner. So, there are some hopeful signs. And the alphabet streets, which were completely decimated. I mean, decimated isn't even the right word. Decimated implies 1 in 10 was destroyed. I think maybe 1 in 10 survived. So whatever the inverse is of decimated. But, the alphabet streets were totally flattened. And now you're starting to see some homes going up there, maybe because the costs are a little bit lower because the lots are smaller. But you're starting to see some signs of life. And I don't know that the 1-year anniversary will be an occasion to look back and marvel at all the progress we've made. But there does seem to be some kind of progress happening. Not for any, help from the city or anything like that, where permits are still ridiculous. By the way, they still haven't voted to reduce or eliminate the permit fees for fire victims because they took 2 weeks off for Thanksgiving at the city council, so the vote's been pushed off to December. So that hasn't happened yet. I mean, there's so much that's just taking forever, and there's a lack of leadership, and the community's basically having to do everything itself. But we're doing what we can. I had a meeting with some of the guys from the fire department, Station 69. I have this nice little mug now from from Station 69, and we're starting up the Marquez Knolls Volunteer Fire Department. So we're starting to put the pieces together there. So little things are coming together, and little parts of rebuilding. For my own part, I had testing done. I don't know if I told you guys this in the last episode, but we had testing done in our house. We had some initial testing where we found lead, but now we found zinc and bismuth and arsenic. So that's always fun. That's going to add substantially to the cost of remediating. And, we're talking, when I say substantially, I mean at least $100,000 more, because now we're going to have to scrape away the soil and do all this other stuff. So, it continues, but I do feel like there's a possibility of some hope in the new year. And it's also because of Joy, and it's because of, frankly, I mean, I have to say, Spencer Pratt's been doing an amazing job of raising awareness. I used to say that it was kind of a double-edged sword because he would raise awareness about things, but not everything was always accurate. But what he's been doing lately is some real detective work, and he's coming up with facts and information that other people aren't getting. And one of the most interesting factual investigations that he's following is this question of whether a California state park official was notified of the January 1st fire, which was set by the arsonist, that later became the January 7th fire, because the state has denied any responsibility for the Palisades fire. But if the state knew that there was a threat to state land from the first fire, the January 1st fire, the Lockman fire they call it, if the state knew and was informed, then the state is on the hook. And there's a resident who published a photograph of a state official standing talking to firefighters on New Year's Day at the burn scar of the Lockman fire. So it does seem like the state has been caught here, and we're waiting to see what evidence emerges. But Spencer has really been pushing for that. So he's really doing incredible work, and we'll just see where all this goes. And as of this podcast, we don't know. But there's a great column by Susan Shelley, which came out in, I think, the Southern California News Group paper. So I think that's the Orange County Register, Pasadena Star News, some of those. You might see it in your local paper out there, Joy. But basically, Susan pointed out that in 2020, the LA Department of Water and Power was fined something like $1.5 million or something in that area because they tried to clear some vegetation for fire safety, and it included this endangered species called the milk vetch. And that may have affected their decision to clear or not clear vegetation ahead of the Palisades fire. That milk vetch appears to have been present At the Lockman fire, Spencer's theory is that the firefighters were told they couldn't clear around the perimeter of the Lockman fire because of this endangered milk vetch.
Oh.
I don't know very much about milk vetch. It sounds like, what happens to you when you get indigestion from too many pieces of cheesecake or something. But but anyway, milk vetch. We'll try to find out some more about it. But anyway, Susan's point is that there was a pattern already established where, because of these environmental regulations, fire safety just wasn't taken into account or was set aside.
Wow.
And the Coastal Commission got involved in 2020, and all kinds of other things happened. So we're putting the pieces together about how this happened. And I think the state's involvement is important because the state has much deeper pockets than everybody else, even if they're in an $18 billion deficit next year. And I think people want the state to be more involved. The state really hasn't done very much. And I think people want to see some leadership and some accountability from the state. So that's my latest update, and we'll just see where all of that goes. But other than that, I'm back in D.C. after being in California. There's this thing called winter that I had to learn about again, and it's really unpleasant. In California, when it's cold, you're usually up in a mountain with some skis, and here it's just cold and gloomy for no apparent reason, and it's no fun. And
Joel, just on that,
to LA.
yeah.
Joel, just on that point with the state involvement, from a legal perspective, you're a legal mind, so to speak. What meaning would that have for any future ramifications on the immunity of the state and what's been bandied about before, which is very hard to go after the state?
It is hard to go after the state, but when we talked to Trey Robinson, remember, he pointed out that the state had already voluntarily waived its 11th Amendment sovereign immunity for certain kinds of conduct. And extreme negligence, which is what's being alleged here, is one of the things that the state can be sued for. So they're not immune from lawsuits. And, it would make a huge difference to Palisades fire victims if they could sue the state for some kind of compensation, because the city of LA basically has no money. And I don't know how much the LA Department of Water and Power has, but it's not as much as a big utility or a much larger utility like SoCal Edison or PG&E or something. So I think that if the state were found to have been negligent in dealing with the fire, then possibly the state could be sued, or there might be enough political pressure to force the state legislature to do something about it. Now, again, the state's running a huge deficit. I mean, fourth year in a row of budget deficits in Sacramento, and that comes off a huge surplus they had before that. I mean, California had so much money post-COVID that the Mann Act, I think, went into effect or was going to go into effect. The Mann Act is this obscure provision, I think from the 1970s, where if the state spends more or takes in more than a certain amount per capita, they have to return it to the taxpayer. So, it got to that level of surplus in I think 2021.
That's wild. Since COVID,
Yeah.
went from such a big surplus to such a big deficit. Why is that? I mean,
It's for a number of reasons. A lot of mandates have kicked in for spending programs that the state just can't afford. Also, the tech industry has been going through a really hard time the last 18 months to 2 years. And some of that is reversing with NVIDIA and the AI boom that's happening, but that's fairly concentrated in a few firms. And so the state really does depend on Wall Street and on a few wealthy taxpayers, basically. And when they're not doing well, especially in the tech industry, Hollywood's been having a rough time. So when the big taxpayers in California are not doing very well, the revenues just fall way short. And there have also been some federal cuts. I think the Republican Congress and the Trump administration cut, I think, something like $1.3 billion that was going to come in for Medi-Cal, for whatever it was. So there have been some federal cuts as well. But it's really, fundamentally, the problem is that the state has a number of spending mandates that have come due, and the revenues haven't kept pace. I mean, revenues are up, but they haven't kept pace with the spending that the state has to do. And so there just isn't money. Now, there's money for some things, but who knows where it comes from. I think that the state needs to do a better job of working with the federal government. And Gavin Newsom says California needs $40 billion of aid, but he's busy fighting with Trump, and Trump's fighting with him. And so there doesn't seem to be any progress on that. So I think they need to repair their relationship to get this thing going.
When you talk about the accountability that's needed from the state, it seems to me that there's two disasters. One is the disaster that happened around the cause of the fire, and you've made a lot of really good points that need to be investigated around all of that, the city's culpability, the state's culpability from its firefighting agency. But I think another whole area, another disaster that we've seen since then, which is at the state level, is the disaster around our insurance. That this disaster is fully man-made. We know exactly where it's coming from. The irony is that, 70% now of all Eaton and Palisades fire survivors who have insurance are experiencing delays and denials that are impeding their entire recovery. And the irony is that California actually has some of the strongest consumer protection laws around insurance in the whole country. So not only are these delays and denials impeding the entire regional recovery, and therefore impacting the taxes the state gets and county gets and the city gets, not only are these delays and denials impeding our entire recovery and causing all this needless suffering among thousands of families, not only are these delays and denials devastating, they're actually illegal. And so, but the reason why they continue to happen is that our laws are not getting enforced by our state insurance commissioner, who is the one person whose job it is to enforce these laws. So I think sometimes, we wonder, can one person really change the world? When in fact, what we're seeing here is that the failures of one official to enforce the laws around our insurance laws, our insurance contracts, the failures of one person is devastating tens of thousands of survivors, our entire recovery, and creating an insurance system that Californians cannot trust right now.
So you have spearheaded efforts to push Ricardo Lara to resign. Tell us a little bit about that. That was an announcement that came out a couple weeks ago, and you have a whole website. Give us the website address and tell us a little bit about that push.
We have created a website called lararesign.org, which everyone can go to. It's lararesign.org. So that's LARARESIGN.org. And this is after 10 months of us trying to get him to enforce our laws so that our recovery can move forward. And then what immediately prompted that was a bombshell New York Times front page expose that showed how for the last 2 years, since 2023, when Lara first announced the sustainable insurance strategy with Governor Newsom, which is supposed to ensure that all Californians can buy insurance. What this expose revealed is that actually what that secret backroom deal did was incentivize companies to do the opposite. It incentivized insurers to dump tens of thousands of policyholders in the months before our fires. So there are probably people listening to this podcast who are dumped by traditional insurance in the months before the fire, causing you to have to scramble and get onto the FAIR plan. That means that you could have been paying insurance premiums for 20 or 30 years to X insurance company, and then boom, right before the fire, you're dumped. That insurance company gets to keep all those decades of premiums with no further obligation to you. And then you're left with a FAIR plan, which is much more expensive and provides much less protection. So with this New York Times expose, we realize that now we face two problems. Number one, we cannot, especially those of us who live in fire zones, we cannot reliably buy or renew insurance. That's one crisis. And that is on Lara. The second crisis is, even if we are lucky enough to be still paying our premiums and having supposed insurance coverage, even if we're lucky enough to have insurance, we can't access the benefits we've already paid for. 2/3 of us can't, over 2/3 of us. So we have these two problems. We have a completely non-functioning insurance system. We can't buy insurance and we can't get the benefits we paid for. And all of this comes back to one official. So it's not just that we want Lara to step down. We're saying that our recovery cannot afford another year of failures in the insurance system. And we would like to ask the governor to appoint a new leader who is committed to rebuilding an insurance system that we and all Californians can trust. So the real focus is also seeking the governor to act, to put in a new official who will actually do the job. So we had a press conference. We had a huge contingent of folks coming out from the Palisades. We held this one in Altadena. And it was a very powerful moment for Eaton and Palisades to be together in seeking an insurance system that works.
Who do you think should be the next insurance commissioner? And by the way, I've said on this show you should run, but I know you don't want to. But who do you think the next insurance, or what's the characteristic of an insurance commissioner? Should they come from the public sector? Should they come from the private sector? Should they come from insurance? Do you have anybody in mind? Like we've had questions like who are you guys going to endorse, basically?
Okay. So I was actually an executive recruiter for 7 years. So I helped Fortune 500 companies find CEOs and board members. I was with a firm called Hydrock and Struggles. And when we do a search, we don't start with candidates, right? We start with where are we going? What does this job require? And then we back out and say, well, what are the skills and qualifications that we are looking for? And we want to agree on all that before we start looking at candidates. So here's what I might propose. Like we want somebody who is honest, who is transparent, who has a record of that. Okay, so the way we know how someone's going to act in the future is by looking at their immediate past behavior. So we want to see a successful track record in being honest and transparent, and who really cares about doing the job. This is the nation's largest consumer protection agency, and we want someone who has demonstrated commitment to serving in that role and not being taken out, and being guided by the worst actors in the industry. So I think that we want someone who has a track record of getting things done. The question, I think, of who you're going to back in the future. There is a race that will be starting, there's a race that will be next year in 2026 in November. There may be many more people jumping in the race. We don't know. So that's, the elections are a choice among candidates. As far as right now, there's really there's two Democrats that I know of who've put their hat into the race. The one that's much more well-known is Ben Allen, who's a senator from the Palisades. I think that Ben seems, he seems honest. He seems to really care. And I think he'd be a jillion times better than Ricardo Lara in that job. If the governor wanted to, he could appoint Ben or any other person in 3 phone calls.
What are the three phone calls?
The 3 phone calls. Maybe, okay, so I'm just speculating here. Maybe it's number 1, calling some wealthy friend of his to offer Ricardo Lara
the job.
A nice, some kind of $200K EVP of Public Affairs role with nobody reporting to him, no role responsibility. So sort of like giving Ricardo like some soft landing. And then
you don't think he's made enough connections at those Bermuda conferences with the insurance industry to find a
maybe he just calls Ricardo and says, okay, you're dragging down the recovery, you're dragging down the California housing market. It's time to move on to your cush job in the industry. So that will be one job, maybe one or 2 phone calls to help Ricardo find something else to do. And then the next job would be to Ben Allen or somebody else to come in and say, all right, please go fix the insurance system so the LA recovery can move forward. So all these families who are suffering needlessly can move on with their recovery, and so that every Californian can have an insurance system we can trust.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, even when you think you're making progress, and I think some of us have been making progress, there are setbacks, and then neighbors who are being forced to sue or who have California Fair Plan.
It's crazy. We all have to sue to just enjoy the protections that we have on paper as taxpayers and that we have on paper as policyholders.
You mentioned the rules and the consumer protections that exist. My public adjuster who I hired really knows the California code very well.
Right.
And that was a key in getting State Farm to move, because he pointed out that, for example, they weren't responding to emails and letters. And under the legal requirements, under the regulations, they have to respond within 15 days. Even if they just say, we received your email, we're not sure what we're doing yet, they have to respond. There has to be some response in 15 days. It doesn't have to be a decision, but they have to respond. And the adjusters from State Farm weren't responding. And so my public adjuster wrote them and said, hey, it's been 41 days or whatever it was since we heard from you. You are in violation of the California Fair Practices, blah, 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 whatever it is, section, et cetera.
Yep.
And that is grounds for a legal case. And suddenly we started getting responses. So right. I think that, it's important that people familiarize themselves with their rights.
Yes.
And if you do hire a public adjuster, and in my case it's been worth it, make sure they know and understand the California code. I mean, they have to be licensed to work in California, but many people, even I think who have the license, aren't intimately familiar with the rules. And the rules do favor the consumer.
Totally.
So make sure, I mean, that 15-day thing, I gave that advice to somebody else who said they hadn't heard since mid-October from State Farm, and I said, well, wait a minute. I mean, that's more than 15 days. You have this provision.
Yeah, Joel, by the way, sorry, just like a small anecdote about that. I had the same thing. I filed a complaint, and I was waiting. I don't know if it was 15 or 21 days. I don't remember exactly, but I was waiting for a response, which never came. Then I got a response like 3 weeks later, backdated to the 15-day period. I was like, I know the mail is slow, and I kept the envelope. It's like, but it's not that slow. So they know what they're doing. They're just playing this game, and it's just like a game that just never ends. Of just like extending the rope and just trying to get away with little things. And quite frankly, I think we're at the point where, like, and Joy, you've been tremendous in like making this kind of like game that everybody knows about like come to the forefront, and everybody knows what they're playing. And I think like they're at a point right now where like they're actually in dangerous territory, where the investigation has been opened. Everything's going to come to light, all the texts, everything that they've done, all the dirty little tricks. And I think there's going to be, at the end of this, it's going to cost them more money than it's worth right now to just settle these suits and be done with them. And I think there'll be suits now regardless, because people feel aggrieved, rightly so. Yeah. And there's going to be bad faith claims. There's going to be fines. There's going to be potential criminal. I think they've overplayed their hand.
Don't mess with fire survivors, especially LA fire survivors. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that I've heard from so many disaster survivor groups around the country and said State Farm has always done this for 30 years. They've always been the bully, the biggest bully in the market. They're the biggest player nationally, and they use their market power to bully policyholders. Joel and Ron, you guys have brought up our rights, and I do want to make sure everybody is very aware of what are our rights. So currently state regulations say that insurance companies have 15 days to respond to policyholder communications, 40 days to accept or deny a claim. So they can send you a letter and say, we're working on it, but within 40 days of your submitting a receipt or any claim, within 40 days, calendar days, they have to accept or deny it. And if they accept it, within 30 days, they have to pay it. Those are your rights. And one of the things about this new LA County investigation as of last Thursday is it can carry civil penalties of $2,500 or $1,500 per day of violation. So every single day that you're late, for every single violation, they can be forced to pay. I forget whether it's $1,500 or $2,500 a day, but the civil penalties alone could be huge, not to mention the criminal charges that could be coming. So yes, it is about our rights and it is about enforcing them. Now, we are actually right now, I am busily working today on coming up with our 2026 legislative agenda. And those rights right now are under regulation, which means that we depend on the insurance commissioner du jour to actually enforce them. And when we have an insurance commissioner who's wanting to look the other way or not wanting to enforce them, then we're kind of stuck. So one of the pieces of legislation that we would love to pass and would love to get support from all of you on is to actually put those 15, 30, and 40 days into state law. So there's statutes, so they're even stronger, and to make it that we don't have to depend on our insurance commissioner to choose to enforce, but that they will carry automatic penalties. So around the country, we have other states who provide automatic penalties, including the state of Texas, which charges 18% annual interest for every day on overdue amounts, for every day. So those penalties that happen will be automatic. And so we would love to see something that's modeled after Texas, that you start accruing interest. Because the thing is, right now they have a huge economic incentive to delay, right? We estimate they're making about 8% on their money. So we would like to change that financial incentive so they lose that 8%, but then there's also a penalty. So Texas does a good job with that. We'd love to model after Texas. And for companies that do not illegally delay and deny, they shouldn't worry about this. They won't be they won't be having to pay any penalties. And that interest should go to the policyholders, because that's money that you're out that you should be making money on.
Yeah, very important to take those steps. And, I wonder what insurance is going to look like in the future. I mean, I think the insurance commissioner needs to start that conversation already, because as I understand it, if you still have your insurance, you can't lose it for a year or 2 years after the fire.
It's only 1 year right now, right? So that's
Okay.
actually something else that we're working on. And we're working with some insurance industry groups even, because there are actually good insurers who want to do the right thing. It's not all insurers that want to just illegally delay and deny. And so what we're working on is also a guarantee for all Californians that if you fire harden your home to IBHS standards, which would be for total loss, it's actually not that expensive. For $1 million home, it would be about $10,000. Or every $1 million of your home would be about $10,000. To fire harden your home is good for you, and it's also good for your neighbors. It's good for everyone, right? For those of us who are restoring our homes, that would be about $50,000. But for everyone who does this, and we'd like to find some way to finance for people who can't afford it, for everyone who does this, you will be guaranteed insurance coverage. That every insurance company operating in the state must offer you home insurance. So we don't have this problem of being randomly dumped or not being able to buy insurance after you do it. So we're shopping these ideas around for 2026 legislation right now. We're just starting the process. You guys are the first people to hear about this, because I'm just writing this now, talking to different industry groups and policy experts to frame up this up. But those are two things that we're really focused on. One is a guarantee that if you fire harden your home, you will be able to buy insurance, and there'll be a full market that you can choose from. And two, that illegal delays and denials will be punished automatically with interest going to the policyholders.
Yeah, very important. I know that there are some efforts by even some of the legislative committees that are looking into the fire. So I know it doesn't apply to the Eaton Fire yet, but we have Senators Rick Scott and Ron Johnson conducting this hearing or this investigation into the Palisades fire. And I know that they're open to suggestions about federal legislation on insurance, on a variety of other topics as well. And insurance is a big piece of this. I mean, as people say, it's the key to making sure that people can move into the Palisades again and live there.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I think the next insurance commissioner is going to have to look at setting up a regulatory framework that allows insurance companies to come in and to be creative. To, there's one insurance company, I think it's called Hippo, and they do home insurance. They don't do it everywhere, and I think they avoid some of the fire risk regions, so we'd have to see. But basically, I think their business model is they're going to insure things that are easily insurable, and they avoid things that are not so insurable. So, for example, I think you can't insure a fur coat. You can insure your laptop from the fire, but you can't insure a fur coat from the fire. So they're kind of picking and choosing what household items they will insure or what household items they won't. So it's not this kind of blanket contents policy, for example. And so it lowers the cost of the premium and the risk to the company. So there are going to have to be solutions like that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's just going to be this vacuum, and people are going to have to self-insure, which is a recipe for disaster.
No, I think you're right. I think that we have to really fundamentally look at the business model, and we need to come up with new models like maybe that or other models that that will create sound and healthy companies. I mean, the irony is now people are starting to look at the original model of mutuals. So if you look at State Farm, for example, State Farm began 100 years ago, and many of these insurance companies as like a mutual, which is a really beautiful idea. Like if the three of us were farmers, and we can be like, okay, we're going to pool our money every day. We're going to put $50 every month. We'll put $50 in or year, and then if Ron's barn burns down, then we're all going to come together and take that kitty, and we're going to make Ron whole. Like that was the original idea. This idea of a mutual. But the problem is, like State Farm, for example, has gotten completely bastardized over the years, so that they're not taking care of their policyholders. All that huge amount of money, they've got $240 billion sitting in Bloomington, Illinois, that's simply controlled by its executives. So it's being run for the benefit of its executives, and they're seeing themselves as adverse to the policyholders that still are their owners. And yet they have absolutely no oversight, no SEC oversight, no federal oversight at all. So it's still technically a mutual that's owned by policyholders, but it's not at all beholden to the policyholders. In fact, it's operating against policyholders' interests. And so it's funny. There are people out there, some big minds, who are thinking about, can we create a new kind of mutual, actually going back to the roots of a mutual, that are nonprofits, that'll be players in the market that will actually pay out to policyholders, make their payout rates known, and grow up and be in the marketplace alongside these other companies that by and large are not paying out their policyholders.
This is a little bit off topic, but we're going to start running into other problems as well. I mean, insurance is a major challenge, but every day that people aren't getting paid out is a day closer to having to sell or declare bankruptcy or whatever. There are a lot of people who have forbearance from their mortgage lenders, and that is all coming due in the next couple of months.
Yes.
In that most people have these balloon payments waiting for them at the end of a 12-month period. And I'm trying to work with my contacts here in DC to figure out if there's something that can be done, because right now the only alternative to that is to restructure your mortgage so that you tack on the balloon payment to the end of the mortgage, which is great for the borrowers, right? It gives you that breathing room. It also could be great for lenders because they can maybe charge a higher interest rate on that last year. But apparently when you restructure your mortgage that way, it is reported to credit agencies in a very negative way, even if you're just a disaster victim. And so people are reluctant to restructure their mortgages, even if it means avoiding the balloon payment, because they don't want to get a hit to their credit rating that affects their ability to do everything else, whether having a credit card, buying a car, or whatever it is. So I'm trying to find out if there's some way, either through regulation or legislation, that they can change that so that when you have a federally declared disaster, the credit rating agencies or the FICO score people, Experian, TransUnion, whatever, they can't punish you for doing what you need to do so that you keep paying your mortgage, so that you can service that mortgage once you get out from under this disaster. I don't know how successful this effort's going to be, but we're trying to figure it out. And we should actually maybe have a guest on at a future show who can talk about it. But I mean, Joy, it's part of a package of things people are dealing with, right? Forbearance, insurance, repairs, alternate living. People are coming up on the end of their alternate living expense policies.
Yes.
Many people have 1 year. You know, we're almost at the 1 year mark. I mean, what's going to happen? Tell us a little bit about what you're hearing from that side of things.
Yeah, Joel, I mean, we're so lucky to have you in Washington, D.C., sort of as our unofficial representative from the LA fires there, and for you to be able to provide an on-the-ground perspective to policymakers in D.C. and with your connections with the administration. I mean, it would be amazing if we can work together on some of these solutions. The banking and mortgage issue is a huge issue for these mortgage payments coming up. You're absolutely right that people are running out of ALE in the coming months. 61% of us are running out of ALE in the coming months. I mean, the thing about insurance is that insurance is only regulated at the state level, and the industry keeps very, very tight reins on that. They do not want any federal oversight. So when Senator Hawley had that hearing last May, they were not happy. But I think that federal government has much more teeth. There's much more sophisticated people working there. When they can just keep it at the state level, and they can install people like Ricardo Lara. Insurance commissioner is not a very sexy sounding job, and it's a very low profile job. So it's easy for them to put people in there that they can influence across the states. And so if we can get some federal oversight, even federal attention, federal training of attention to these issues, like what Senator Hawley did, that will be, I think, incredibly helpful to solving them. But you're absolutely right. We have a huge housing crisis that's coming up in the coming months, on top of what's already been a housing crisis in LA County. And I think it's going to take all of us to get solutions. On the Eaton side, we're working on getting Edison to provide immediate housing support, since Edison is the one who burned and poisoned our homes.
Joel,
that across the board, we need these issues to be discussed, to be addressed.
Joy and Joel, one of the great ideas that I've heard the last few weeks, and it wasn't particularly regarding the fire victims, but it was more about unlocking the national housing market for younger people, but I actually think would really work well for fire victims, is this idea of portable mortgages. And I'll tell you why. Joel, I don't know if you've heard, I think the FHA head was saying this is under consideration for a national program. The idea of a portable mortgage is that you can take your current mortgage and take it to a new home. So if you were to move from Palisades, you could take your mortgage from your Palisades home and buy a home with DC without those same terms. Meaning,
that would be amazing.
That would be an amazing program, and I'll tell you why. Because there's a huge value in the mortgages that people have currently in their homes in the Palisades and Altadena, because most of them have been refinanced over the last 10 years. They're at very favorable rates to the market, 2-3%.
I'm never going to move because I got a 3%.
And so many people are in that box where they're said, I'm never going to move. Well, now they have to move because they have a house under construction or a house that's never going to be built in the next 3, 4, 5 years. If they can go use that mortgage to buy another property so they don't have to pay rent and they don't have to pay this double whammy and hold on to their lots, it unlocks a huge amount of value, and it's value that's just sitting there right now. If they could port the mortgage to something else, it would be a really valuable way to unlock the value in their current mortgages. And I know it was meant for something else, and that's unlocking the housing market. But I think in this case, it would be a super helpful solution to what people are experiencing.
That sounds fabulous. I mean, I personally would love to work with anybody who's got great solutions that will help us move forward in this recovery. I mean, that one sounds really great, and I love the idea of connecting that to this recovery. There's so many people, I think, in LA County who are living in bigger houses, let's say people who are nearing retirement who would like to downsize, but it's like, but I got a 2% mortgage. How can I downsize? How can I move to some other place? But somebody else could be using their big family home. I mean, it just seems like that those low mortgages that us older people who are lucky enough to having that is causing us to have much less housing mobility than we need in the region. I mean, young people need to be using our big family homes, right? And we could be moving on to whatever condos or whatever places that we can use, now that we're empty nesters kind of thing.
Correct.
So,
Joel, you're on mute.
It's such a great point. No, it's important. I was talking to somebody at HUD today, actually, and there are so many issues that they're working on at once. They're looking at homelessness, they're looking at all kinds of things, the housing crisis, but this portability is a really big issue. And in LA, in the last week or so, they enacted new rent control rules, which, while not as strict as they could have been, are still going to make it difficult for developers to build. At the same time, we haven't really touched on the affordable housing issue that much since SB 79 went through. We had a couple of episodes about that, but basically there's this ongoing fight about densification and affordable housing. So on the one hand, there's very little housing construction happening in LA, and landlords are worried that they won't be able to collect rent or replace tenants or whatever. So there are all these disincentives to building housing. But then there's this affordable housing program that apparently developers are hugely excited about. So they're building these ugly towers, and SB 79 is going to make that easier to do near so-called transit hubs. Mm-hmm. So it's really a tale of two different construction and housing markets where they're just deciding to densify in this way. And I think we've sort of seen this happening already. I mean, I remember visiting San Francisco 10 or 15 years ago, and there were these really ugly apartment buildings going up because San Francisco had some kind of densification policy that overrode the kind of not in my backyard opponents, but didn't really create housing people actually wanted to live in. I mean, the number of units went up, but I don't know if that people actually bought these units or rented them or wanted to live in them. And I think that's a whole issue that we need to discuss as people start trying to move back into Pacific Palisades and to Altadena. I saw, by the way, that supposedly the first house was completed, the first new house in Altadena, and it's an ADU. Yeah, I mean, it looked pretty nice. I mean, it's a nice ADU, but tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, 600 square foot ADU.
Yeah, that's the first house to get.
Look a lot bigger. Yeah.
I mean, it's something. Is that going to substitute for the main house? Like, are people going to live in that ADU?
No. It's just kind of there. I mean, the owner didn't want to come and talk on the record, so we don't know the full story. But actually, the guy who wrote that story, Liam Dillon, moved from the LA Times to the Politico. This is his first story there, so he sent it to me last night.
So you know the author, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's now 10, 11 months in. This is the very first thing that's been built in the Eaton Fire side. And somebody was just telling me that, actually Liam was part of the LA Times group that did that huge story on the 5 wildfires before this year. And he said for all of those fires, there were already multiple houses built by 10 months in.
Wow.
And so what that package did, I think it's important for everyone to know, is that the LA Times did this months-long analysis of all the major wildfires in California, the 5 biggest wildfires in California before this year. They all happen between 2017 and 2020. And they found that as of 2025, which is like 8 years later, only 38% of those homes have been rebuilt. There were 22,500 houses that burned, and now 8 years later, only 38%. So we think like, well, gosh, it's only, it's already been 1 year and only a couple of houses have been built. But what if we're 8 years from now? That would be 2033, and only 38% of our homes have been rebuilt. How would we feel about that? And what they said is they analyzed all the different factors and which ones have been rebuilt and which haven't. And the number one factor is insurance. So when insurance has timely and fully paid out a family, that family tended to rebuild. And when it didn't, that family was often displaced forever with massive loss of wealth and, future they've built for their kids, et cetera, et cetera. So, that does sort of train the attention on saying the insurance payouts are not just this abstract idea of insurance, or it's not just about money. It's often about whether we can ever get back home.
Well, every great epic story is about getting back home. I mean, this is something I think about a lot. During the pandemic, I went back and read some of the Greek mythology that I had missed growing up, and Homer's Odyssey. The Odyssey is all about a guy trying to get home. I mean, it's the greatest theme.
Beautiful. I'm going to quote you on that. I was talking to Joel Pollak, and he connected what we're doing to Homer's Odyssey. Odysseus.
It's such a great story. I mean, he's, Odysseus is Odysseus, isn't it? Yeah, I'm trying to remember now. But he's stranded on an island where he's imprisoned by this nymph queen or something who wants to keep him for herself, but he misses his wife and his family, and he decides to leave, and he embarks on this journey, and it takes him forever to get home, and comes home and he finds that someone else is living in his house, and it's a whole thing. But it's really the great theme of great literature. I mean, even in the Bible, the Exodus, right? It's the great story of the Exodus, the greatest story ever told. It's a story of leaving, but it's a story of going home. I mean, it's the people going home to the promised land, and
so beautiful.
Going home is the great theme. And I think that it's the reason I took the job at the California Post, is that I saw it as part of this quest to get home. And I was just talking to a friend before coming on the podcast today, and I said, it's interesting to think about LA as home, because I didn't grow up in LA, and I didn't go to school in LA, and I didn't get my first job in LA, but I have lived in LA for 15 years, and all of my kids were born at the same hospital in Santa Monica, and it's my home, and it's my home even more now because of what happened. And I've decided to make it my home by fighting for it. I mean, this more than anything else, I feel connected to it. And we did an episode last week when I talked about my recent trip to Israel, and I went to Gaza and everything. And one of the interesting things I felt this time after being in Israel, because I had gone many times during the war, and I just felt differently about it, in the sense that I felt like I was from somewhere in a different way, that the fire had really changed how I related to this country. It was just a unique feeling, and I hadn't been back since the fire. I had been going back to cover the war once every couple of months, and then, since the fire happened, so I didn't go back for a year. And after a year away, it felt like I'd just been there yesterday, because things are familiar. But I really felt like my own relation to where I was from had changed, and I think that all of us are struggling with it, and people are struggling about, financial questions, and do they stay or do they sell, do they rebuild, and there's, all of this is fraught with emotion and sometimes feelings of guilt and responsibility and all kinds of things. I'm rambling a little bit here, so tell me when I should stop. But
one thing I would like to say, though, is, I think that you bring up such deep and visceral themes about this idea of returning home, and I love that you've brought in mythology and all this. It just shows that this is so core to who we are as humans. One thing that we are seeing locally in speaking with our mental health providers is a surge in suicidal ideation coming into the holidays, coming into the 1-year anniversary. If anybody, our local mental health providers are all manning the 988 number. So if anyone listening to this, or if you know of anyone who is really struggling or in crisis, you can call or dial 988, and there are counselors who are ready for that. We also are working with mental health providers at Eaton Fire Survivors Network, and everyone in the Palisades is more than welcome. We will be hosting a series of emotional wellness large-scale meetings with breakout rooms, which will be really fun. I think that we all, going to the holidays, we all can have, enjoy some time of connection and support. And so if anyone's interested in joining us and me and the top mental health providers in the region, please join us. You can come to our website at efsurvivors.net. We'd love to join with you in community there.
You just jogged my memory about something. I can't even remember where I saw this, but apparently there is a high rate of suicide, or higher. I don't know what the base number is that they're measuring the increase from, but there's a higher rate of suicide now among people with standing homes, because the insurance fight. Yeah, the insurance fight. Apparently, my wife's sort of dark humor joke about the whole thing was, I put the fire out on my fence during the fire. She says, you should have let it burn because the insurance issues would have been a lot simpler. And she was joking, sort of, but it is true that when you have a standing home, it just gets a lot more complicated with the insurance company, and you're also paying a mortgage. I mean, there are people paying mortgages who lost their homes, but the financial stress is massive, and so apparently there's a higher suicide rate among people with standing homes.
Wow.
I can't remember where I saw it. It might have been a City of Angels survey or something. They're doing another survey. I just got a text message about it. But we should probably do an episode on mental health as well, just to give people those resources, especially as we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary.
Yeah, I'd be glad to connect you with, so we have some really top global experts in trauma recovery here in LA. I'd be glad to connect you.
I know we're running out of time, but I'll share one little anecdote. My kids have been pretty affected by the whole experience, and they're moving on a little bit, which is good. But my son still, I think, just misses the neighborhood so intensely. In his mind, he imagines coming back to the neighborhood where his friends were on every corner. And it's hard to explain that isn't really the case right now, that nobody's living in the neighborhood. There's one friend who's still going to the school and everyone else is basically gone. And I think that's the hardest thing for kids to adjust to, is he hasn't let go of it. It's been a year, and just the sense of missing friends so much. And that could almost be another episode. What do you do? How do we help kids?
Yes. I think, and it's so difficult for parents to see our children struggling and not know how to help them.
I mean, Ron, you've had some of these issues with your kids and schools and switching schools.
Yeah. No, it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge every day, because I had 3 kids. We had to switch into 3 new schools, now 2, because we switched one again. And it's just a huge challenge. It's like new friends, same thing. My youngest always talks about going back to the old house and seeing his old friends. And quite frankly, I don't even like to even drive by there because it's too depressing. It's just like, as soon as I cross into that neighborhood and start seeing the burned buildings, it's just a bad feeling for me. And so and it's the same for them. So it's definitely like mental health issues. I think things will get better over time, to put an optimistic, hat on it. And I think we have nothing to do but just keep on keeping on and rebuilding and working to get back home. That's, I think, what we're all doing. So yeah.
I would say just maybe we can end that on a hopeful note. Like, for me, we are so lucky in my family. This is my home. We've been back after moving 9 times. We got paid out quickly by USAA, went through a couple rounds of remediation, but we're home. And my older daughter, who was struggling with some mental health issues, or her therapist, we started with a therapist who called it disassociation, which was, she was imagining herself outside of her body and watching her life. Her therapist says this is from all the displacement and the trauma. It's a trauma response. That after we moved back home, a couple months, just getting back into the routines and just being grateful to be home, that our kids have been moving out of that. And so, I think that if we can get people back home, if we can get people financially stable, that, as you said, Ron, that these things can pass, but we sort of have to get our community there.
Yeah. Well, Joy Chen of the Eaton Fire Survivors Network, thanks so much for joining us, and you're always welcome. And we'll have more in the weeks to come, including, I think, an episode about construction, which I'm working on, and lots to come. And we'll start looking toward that 1-year anniversary, and maybe we'll do some special programming around that. But for now, for Oren, who's overseas, and for Ron and myself, Joel Pollak, until next time, stay strong.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Three Homeless Guys. If this episode hit home, please subscribe to our channel. Check out 3homelessguys.com for RSS feeds to your favorite streaming service. Follow us on social and share this with a friend who needs to hear it. Drop us a review or shoot us a message at pod@3homelessguys.com. We'd love to hear from you. Stay strong, and we'll catch you next time.